Welcome, everybody. My name is Robbie Borth. I use he, him pronouns. I am a teacher of high school English in Central Florida at a school called Trinity Preparatory School. And I am welcoming you to what I call the Ludoverse Lab. This is part of a kind of a summer trilogy where I've been inviting people to play some fantasy role-playing games with me. But these are going to be fantasy role-playing games which have been tinkered with or modified or revised or pulled into different ways where either explicitly they have some application to the classroom environment, or if that's not being done explicitly, I'm seeing ways in which the way that these games are being used, that they could certainly, with just a little bit of additional tinkering, could be incorporated into a classroom setting. So we started last month with Richard Ruane, who has a project called Barrow's Keep, where he takes a kind of fantasy role-playing game engine, but adds a lot of kind of social and political intrigue into the mix that makes things interesting. And then this month, July, we are going to be doing a couple sessions looking at what is called the World of Professionals, which Ryan Windeknecht has been using in the context of the philosophy classroom, but I think could have implications to people in other subject areas as well, especially if you're interested in kind of the topic of ethics and values. And then next month, we're going to have Jesse Bernico with a project that he has called Dungeons and Dilemmas, where he kind of takes the dungeon crawl, but explicitly works at kind of adding kind of ethical dilemmas into the mix, so that you are not simply kind of going in there to plunder, but you have to kind of start thinking about certain kind of ethical dilemmas that are facing you. And what I was going to do, that's my little kind of introductory spiel, but I want to just kind of very quickly go around, and we will have the various players introduce themselves, and we will then end up with Ryan, and Ryan can introduce himself and then kind of take us away. And I'm just going to kind of, I'm looking at my screen, I'm just going to go kind of clockwise around my screen. So Sudro, could we start with you?
Yeah, no problem. I'm Sudra Brown. Following your lead, I use he, him pronouns. Uh, I am in Southern California. I've been in public education for a little over 5 years in various capacities, but mostly teaching English. Um, Honestly, currently unemployed and trying to find another position. We'll see where that goes, but I've been interested in uh, using some element of game-based learning really since I did my coursework at Pepperdine University back in 2012 and 2013, partly based on John Cassie's influence, but also based on Reality It's Broken, really fine book that was really had kind of, I think, the sort of some of the initial thoughts that I think a lot of people read about the idea. And yeah, mostly just trying to figure out how to do that mostly in an English classroom, and especially in a large public education setting, which is often challenging.
Okay. Aaron, we'll go to you next. Looks like Brandon lost connection, but let's just continue on, and Brandon will hopefully rejoin us. But Aaron, if we can go to you next.
Hi, I'm Aaron DeRosa. I also use he, him pronouns. I am originally from New York, but I've been out in Southern California now for about 10 years. I teach American literature at Cal Poly Pomona. It's a 4-year state school CSU system.
Okay.
That's my story.
Okay. Patrick, go to you next.
Yeah, hi, I'm Patrick. Also use he, him pronouns. I am in the middle of a grad program in experimental psychology. And the further I get into academia, the more I realize maybe that the traditional academic path isn't for me. And so I've been thinking a lot more about ways to get into education. The role playing experience is kind of very new to me, but it's like what I have done so far, I've really enjoyed, and I really like the idea about thinking about how it intersects with education. So trying to get into it.
Okay. And John, go to you next.
My name is John Cassie. I am also in Southern California. Aaron, we're going to have to find some time to get together and with Sudro and play. We're sort of we form an almost perfect equilateral triangle, given where we are. So that's desirable. I am a director of curriculum and innovation at TVT Community Day School. It's an independent Jewish community day school in Orange County, about 625 students. My responsibilities are transitional kindergarten through grade 12 across all modalities of curriculum and innovation. I met Robbie when I was presenting on social emotional learning and role-playing games at Anyone's Game, which was at Ringling in Sarasota. I wrote a book a few years ago called Level Up Your Classroom, which is on Amazon. The only thing better than buying one copy is buying two. And believe me, you'll feel better for it, right? And if you leave me a 5-star review, you'll feel even better for it. No, I'm kidding. I can't not. And Sudro and I have known each other for good grief. We've actually known each other for about 15 years, but we traveled in exactly the same social circle, but like one parallel universe removed. So I always knew his name, but never actually met him until we were both here in Southern California. We're both originally from Massachusetts.
Yeah, we were at UMass at the same time and literally knew all of the same people. And just, I mean, it was like we went like this.
It is quite possibly the weirdest relationship in my life, right? From that vantage point. And I host the Game Level Learn podcast, which Robbie was on a couple of episodes ago. Every season has a kind of a different theme. This season, we're talking with folks like you guys, and maybe Ryan and Aaron and Brandon. You guys would all want to be on the show at some point, talk about your experience doing this and kind of how this modality is shaping your instructional practice and sort of tips and tricks for teachers who don't quite know how to make the equation balance. Robbie, a friend of mine who a really, really, really young teacher, hotshot, nice guy, texted me maybe a week ago, and he said, "I just got around to Robbie's episode. Oh my God, he's so great!" And I said, "Well, Max, he'll talk to you.
Oh yeah.
So you better talk to him.
Okay.
My work is done. Now I will pass you on to the great master in Florida." So. I'm keen to do the work and learn from people. What I say always is that we're, even though I've been at this for about 9 years, it's still early days in this work, and we're all evangelists. So let's get to it.
Okay. And Brandon, you dropped out for a second, but you perfect timing now to come back because you'll wrap it up before we get to Ryan. So Brandon, say a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sorry, my internet just disappeared. I'm Brandon Burmeister. I teach at the same school as Robbie at Trinity Prep in Orlando, Florida. I teach government and economics. So to me, like, games works really well. I've been playing since I was a kid, and it just works really well because you set up decision-making dilemmas, thought processes, things like that. They can present as scenarios to kids that make it more relevant, right? They get into the minds of why politicians and business leaders make the decisions that they do. Right, especially in this day and age, we're looking at these incredibly controversial decisions that are being made on all sorts of different levels in reaction to all this kind of stuff. It works really well, I think, and all that. So that's always been my interest in looking at this stuff and kind of going in from there. So nice to meet everybody. Sorry, I checked out for a minute.
Right, and Ryan, that takes us to you. If you want to just say a few words by way of introducing yourself, and then you can just kind of immediately launch us into the world of professional.
I am Ryan Windeknecht. I'm amazed, Robbie, that you pronounced my name as well as you did. Most people don't. I teach philosophy at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and I've been using game-based learning to some extent in all of my classes since the spring of 2016. Kind of started peppering it in the beginning, that semester, and then took the summer to kind of redesign a bunch of stuff, and then just jumped in and redesigned a couple of my classes, just top to bottom game-based learning, and then been doing it ever since. And what you all are going to be playing today and next weekend is the first game that I designed. It's had by far the most work. It's been used the most in the classroom. It's for a course that I teach every semester, I think, at least a couple of sections, sometimes up to 4. So it's had the most work on it. So I'm super excited for you all to play it. Thanks to Robbie for inviting me to run it for you all. Having said that, I'll preface this by saying this still is very much a work in progress, especially because with COVID-19, like in the spring semester, everybody going online, in whole or in part. I'm going to be online for the fall and probably the spring. And it's my first, this past spring was my first time online. So I'm having to take all of this stuff that I used to have in the classroom and finding some way to make it work online. Luckily, I'm amazed, and Robbie and I've chatted about this a little bit, that how much online gaming kind of prepared me for this. It's amazing, how much of what I learned online gaming I've been able to take and apply to my classes online. And so it's become this kind of recursive feedback thing where, my gaming came into the classroom, and now my online gaming's helping me build this stuff online. And now I'm bringing the stuff that I'm doing online back into games, and it's just kind of all of it feeding itself. So what you're going to see here, what I'm going to share with you, like I said, is all very much, it would be a work in progress anyway, because this thing, I play it in the classroom, I get feedback, I tinker with it between 7 semesters, I throw it back in the classroom, get feedback, tinker with it, throw it in. So it's constantly changing, but now even more so with this move to online. So with that, let me go ahead. In the chat, what I'm going to do, I had previously, I think yesterday, sent out a quick sort of preview link just so you all could take a look at what we'll be doing. What I've got now is a bit more stuff. So I'm going to put a link to a Google folder here in our chat, and you should all have access to that. I've made the link. Whoever's got access should be able to open that up and edit whatever's there. When you click on it, what you should see are I've made a character sheet for everybody in our session today. And I've also, just for reference, there's a folder called Playbooks, which has all of my analog stuff that I used in the spring before going online. I'm not sure how much I'll be referencing that, but it might be helpful for you all just to see what I was using in the classroom. And then I've also got my syllabus in there so you can see what I was doing in the spring with all of this stuff. So that's all in there. But what we're going to be dealing with are those kind of those character sheets that I've created in Google Sheets. They've each of them, like I said, has got someone's name on it from our session today. So if you want to just click on your character sheet and open it up, I'm going to get out of here and open up my master file. Now I think this should be set up like my students will see it, in the sense that there are boxes you can edit, but most of it you shouldn't be able to edit, so you don't have to worry about accidentally like deleting something and having the file like freak out. So it should be set up so that you can only edit the stuff that the students would be meant to edit. I think before we go through this, I'll just kind of tell you what I had envisioned. I'll just again thank Robbie for this opportunity. I've never had the opportunity to sit down with a group of, educators, gamers, and have this much time to go over this game. Typically, I'm running it every semester, but I'm taking it to conferences, and maybe I've got an hour and a half to sit with a room full of people. And so this is a super unique experience. So thanks to Robbie, and thanks to you all for agreeing to do this. My idea, I guess, is that we would try to do character creation today. Also try to create our village. I don't know how much time that's going to take us, honestly. If we manage to have a chunk of time at the end, like a good chunk of time, we might just do something really quick just to kind of get our feet wet and see how it works. If not, I think Robbie had mentioned this in the email, what I'd planned to do was to actually run you through like a lesson or two next time, which would involve kind of sending you all a reading assignment, and we can decide together kind of at the end here what we would be interested in looking at. Typically, what I do in the class is we've got 5 ethical theories we all look at, which will be relevant for our characters. And we've got 5 professional problems that we look at so that we can talk about how our characters might approach these problems. So at the end of the session today, we can kind of talk about those 10 different topics and maybe see what we might be interested in doing next time. Yeah, John.
Ryan, just a kind of a procedural question to help you, right? In your class, would you have your students generate characters? Then there would be a time, like a gap, and then lesson 1?
So
does that normally work?
Typically, so we do character creation the first couple of days of class, and then the third class, roughly, like the game begins. And every class, when the game plays basically from the start of the semester to the end of the semester.
Got it.
In some capacity. So
my question was actually what was sort of pointing to a meta, right? That that if you have character creation happen and it gets complete, and then there's even a small gap. My experience from my own work is that the players will then talk offline to each other, and it might be productive for our purposes, since we're going to play this next week, to actually insert the meta right into that you would normally have, right? See if maybe you get some, the 5 of us playing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of us playing, might have some additional feedback on emails and exchanges that we made over the course of the week. Oh, your character kind of is coming at the village from this perspective, and that kind of thing, right? So, as always, I'll do whatever you like, but I think inserting that meta might be a smart play.
For sure, yeah. No, whatever discussion takes place, that would be awesome. And I mean, I'll just say this too. If anybody, I want this to be as discursive as possible. So if anybody has thoughts or ideas or comments, feel free to just, do what John just did, right? Indicate you got something to say and just jump in, right? So cool. Yeah, that sounds great, John. So we'll do that if we've got meta stuff going on. I'll be honest, I don't know, outside of what I see from my students' work, I have no idea what they do outside of class. So just because I assign so much that I don't ask them to take on any extra. I'm sure though that there are gamers in the classroom who are doing that. So we'll see what you all end up doing.
let me I would assure you, Ryan, that even though you may not know about it, and you should ask the next time you run it, right?
Okay.
There's always something happening in that meta,
Uh-huh.
and if you don't know what it is, you probably want to capture it from a scholarly perspective, and see if maybe there's a way to build experience or some aspect of village design into whatever's going on in that meta, right?
Sure.
Something's happening.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. No, that will be interesting. We'll see what happens. All right. So that's our plan. And I think so. We've got a 3-hour slot in total, Robbie. Is that
Right.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere in there around the halfway point, we'll try to take a break. And Robbie, if I miss it, feel free to flag it up and alert me that I've missed our halfway point break, or anybody really for that matter.
I would definitely reiterate that. Yeah, if anybody's getting, if we haven't taken the break yet and you feel like, okay, I've got to do that, just let us know, and we can be flexible that way.
And that actually reminds me. So, I mean, so before we even look at our character sheets here, if you go to that shared folder, there is a file that's just called The Village. That one's shared for all of us, so we'll all look at the same one. So go ahead and open that up. We'll do this after we create our characters. But when you open up this file, you'll see there's 4 tabs at the bottom. And I'll say more about kind of what's going on this sheet in a sec. But click on the miscellaneous tab for me. So when I play online, and this is something that I definitely learned from this online gaming group that this is where I actually met Robbie, called The Gauntlet. I was introduced, and I'm now seeing it, I think we're probably all seeing it popping up in our indie role-playing games, safety tools for the table, right? So we can deal with difficult content in a responsible way, right? I have informally tried to bring this stuff into the classroom, but I'm now deciding with this completely online semester coming up to make it explicit. So I'm explicitly bringing safety tools from tabletop role-playing games into my classroom. And so this miscellaneous tab is like my first stab at this. Typically I would use at the online table, there's a couple of tools I would use. One's called the X card. Are you all familiar with the X card? Show of hands if you are. All right. For those who aren't, the X card's real simple. It's just if you're at the table, you literally put a note card with an X on it, center of the table. And if anything comes up during play that people don't want in the game for whatever reason, doesn't matter. Tap that card, say X card, whatever. The GM will probably ask, what exactly is it that you're X carding? Won't ask why, but just so we all know what it is, so we all know to keep it off the table. Excise it from the game, won't come up again. I really thought about this. I don't think I can have that in the classroom. Simply because for my courses, we intentionally touch on difficult subject matter, right? And while I appreciate that people in the class might not feel comfortable with that, my job there is to bring things in. When I'm talking about medical ethics, I'm going to be talking about euthanasia. I'm going to be talking about abortion. I will warn my students up front, and I apologize for not warning you all up front with the content warning, but I'll give them content warnings. But I didn't feel comfortable bringing the X card in. Similar sort of tool, lines and veils. I didn't feel comfortable bringing that in for same reasons. It keeps content off the table. So what I've done here, you can see on the tab, is I've taken Brebo Sheldon's script change, and I've, for the most part, just inserted it in here. I did change one thing that I'll note here in a second. But what script change does, you can see we've got 6 different tools at our disposal here. We've got a pause, a reframe, a rewind, a resume, an instant replay, and a fast forward. And I'm hoping that what this will do in my class, because occasionally, students say things that you can feel the room tense up when they say it. And I'll be honest, like, I've not been the best at this at times. Like, sometimes I don't think I've handled it the best way that I could have. And I mean, aside from, I think, this empowering my students to be like, hey, let's pause for a second and talk about this, it's going to empower me as an instructor to be able to say, look, we know these tools are on the table. So when something does come up, I won't feel like I'm calling someone out unfairly, right? Because I've told them, like, this is here and we're going to use it. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how this works. It doesn't happen often, but again, when things are said that I think are problematic, I want to be able to hit that pause button. The one that I mean, I'll just real quick, and you can read the brief descriptions there, but they basically do what their name suggests. Pause is to pause the play so we can talk about something. Resume play. The reframe, I'm going to hold on to a second because this is not part of the original script change. This is something I've thrown in here. Instant replay is after a scene. You can look back over what's happened if you want to just kind of say, hey, that was awesome. Or if you want to discuss something that happened. Rewind, go back, play something over that might not have gone well the first time. And fast forward, you can either go over difficult content and kind of veil it, fast forward past it, fade to black. Or if you've just got something going on, like, for example, in a lot of fantasy role-playing games, traveling over land can be an act of attrition, and you just want to fast forward through it and get to the action. Right? Now, the one that I've inserted in here is this reframe. And the reason I've done this is so when I design kind of scenarios for my students, they're almost always based on either a philosophical thought experiment or a case study. And often students want to kind of break out of the fiction and start referencing real world stuff. And I think a little bit of that is cool because you want them to make those connections. But when the discussion shifts from the game to the real world, well, now we're not playing the game anymore. And so I kind of wanted this reframe tool. So at some point I could say, all right, come on, y'all, let's pause for a second, reframe this, bring it back to the discussion, to the game itself. There's a couple of reasons I want this. Like, one, like I said, it just breaks the game. Game stops, and now you're just having a discussion. It might be a fruitful discussion, which is awesome, but the game's no longer being played. The other thing I've noticed in class, and I've had colleagues who have observed the class note the same thing, that by fictionalizing these problems with this fantasy medieval setting, students are more willing to engage with them openly. By having these characters, these roles that aren't theirs, that aren't their views necessarily, they're more willing to say things they might not be willing to say and put themselves out on the line and say if they didn't have the role there. And so I want to be able to, if we start straying from the game, to bring it back to the game. So they have that sort of buffer, that fantasy world, that character, so that the discussion doesn't, get to the point where people are uncomfortable about putting their own views out there. All right, so that's our script change safety tool. I'll pause for a second there. Any thoughts on the safety tool there? Comments or questions?
Yeah, I actually had a thought. So you mentioned that you were trying to avoid like X cards and lines and veils.
Yeah.
But then you have the fast forward mechanic.
Yeah.
And so does it accomplish the same thing, or is there something about the fast forward that is different than that?
So I think that fast forward probably does the same thing as a veil would do. I hope that it doesn't disrupt the game in class like I fear the X card and veils would do. I don't know. That's a worry, right? You're right to point that out. Fingers crossed it doesn't, and if it does, I might have to remove it from the. I want it there to fast forward though past kind of the typical game stuff that you might play out at the table that you won't want to do in class, like I said, like traveling and things like that. But you're right. If it gets too disruptive, I might just have to pull it from the toolkit and not use it. Yeah. that address your comment, Patrick?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Cool. No, thank you. Any other thoughts or comments on the script change? Okay. So that's what we'll be using when we play, is the script change. I've also just got on there an open door policy. And I've actually, I mean, this is one that I have explicitly used in the classroom. That if there is, like I said, I give my students the content warnings. If something difficult does come up, they are free to, opt out. I find that this happens often with, I have students who are ROTC, and they literally, when they are in uniform, cannot talk about things that might go, they cannot express views that are negative towards the government when they are in uniform, right? So if we're talking about, one of the case studies that we used to do, still do sometimes, is Guantanamo Bay. Just don't talk about it, right? Or they don't talk about it. I've also had students who just had personal experiences, sick family members, their own experiences, and they just don't feel comfortable talking about it. That's fine. We're going to do the same thing at our table. If while we're playing something comes up that somebody doesn't feel comfortable with, feel free to, maybe tell us in the chat that you're going to step out. You don't have to tell us why. And then just let us know when you're back. I don't expect, go for it, Aaron.
I just have a question. The safety tools look a lot like some of the other moves that you've got written into the other file. I'm wondering if in the classroom, the way that you're answering Patrick's question, it seems like there's almost like a meta gaming of like how to be a student in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be what the script change is actually calling for, right? Here are the moves that you as a student can make in this space that will protect you, protect the learning environment, but also speed up the learning environment if you've already got the point and you want to move on, or you didn't get it and need to go back to something, you rewind. Or have you used it in that way, or is that sort of like, does it manifest that way?
So I have not ever done it explicitly like that. No, but that is an awesome observation, and like maybe even writing those not as safety tools, but as actual moves, like you said, as like, here are moves for being a student in the classroom. I think it's an awesome observation. No, that will be a change before the fall starts. Thanks, Aaron.
Cool.
Cool. What was I gonna say? Must not have been important. So those will be our safety tools that we'll use. All right. Enough about that. I don't want to look at any of these other tabs just yet on our village. Like I said, this is going to be something we'll do after we get our characters. So we'll just save that for now and jump over to our villagers. So I'll give you a second if you don't have that open just yet. So before we start putting words and numbers and stuff in here, this, I think Robbie advertised it this way as well. So World of Professionals is at least it started as a Dungeon World hack. Show hands if you've played Dungeon World before. All right, just about everybody. For those who haven't, Dungeon World is a indie powered by the apocalypse homage to Dungeons and Dragons. We all played Dungeons and Dragons, show of hands. No, but those who haven't played have played Dungeon World, so we're all in a good space. All right, so what I did was I took, so this was the spring of 2016. I had started reading various stuff on gamification and game-based learning. I had noticed, like I was teaching these classes I was kind of getting bored with. I'd read some self-help book that had talked about bring your hobbies into your work to make it more interesting, that kind of, so I started thinking about that stuff. Speaking of books, John, I think I have your book. I didn't put the title to the name, but I'm gonna look for it at our break. It was so I started reading some of these books, and I started thinking, oh, well, look, I played Dungeons and Dragons. One of the problems I was having was that my students weren't really having consistent ethical thinking. D&D characters have alignments. Why not just swap out alignments and stick in ethical theory? At least that way, even if students don't agree with the ethic that they're applying, they can start thinking about what it looks like to consistently apply an ethic to multiple situations. One of the other problems I had was that this professional responsibility course, I get, because it's professional responsibility, not medical ethics, not business ethics, not engineering ethics, I get students from across the university. And there's no way that I can like touch on every single profession they're going to go into. But D&D's got professions, right? You've got your paladin, you've got your cleric, you got your thief. So I started seeing when I could pair, what real world analogs I could pair with my D&D professions. And so in that spring of 2016, with the last couple of weeks of class, I decided to give my students a break. I pulled out some Dungeon World playbooks and just threw them at the class. And we played Dungeon World for a couple of weeks. Didn't go over as well as I'd hoped. Some of the students really got into it. A lot of the students, and part of this is just what I did, right? I just took a game and threw it in the classroom with not a lot of thought. Just this like spark of like, oh, alignments and theory, professions and classes. I just threw it in the room. The gamers loved it. The students who weren't gamers thought I was wasting their time. I probably was, but that was the start of it. And from there, I started pulling more mechanics out and shoving more pedagogy in. And what you've got in front of you is where I'm at now. It still, I think, has Dungeon World's fingerprints on it. Like, it's still clearly got some references to that game. So yeah, so I think it's still got Dungeon World's fingerprints on it. You can still see Dungeon World there. But I've put in some mechanics from other games. Most notably, I think maybe some of Avery Alder's games. I've got, and I'll talk about what I've pulled out and what I've stuck in, because I've done it for pedagogical reasons. So I'll save kind of talking about that actual process as we go through the character sheet here. I apologize. This feels like I'm lecturing, and I really didn't want it to feel like this. Again, at any point you all want to jump in with anything, feel free. I'm going to click over. Go for it, John.
Just very quickly, to maybe a little piece of reassurance to you. It's helpful to me as essentially a play tester who's learning your system and hopefully can provide you with some useful feedback to take it into your classroom. I have to know your thought process. I have to know how you came. How does this thing come into existence in this form, right? And if I don't know what you're telling me now and you're concerned, it feels sort of lecture-y and a little maybe, didactic or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
From my perspective, I need to know this to be of any use to you. And I want this to be useful to me, but I mean, frankly, we're part of a community, so I want to be able to maximally help you as well. So if we need to know how you thought it through, carry on.
Cool. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, and I would just also add for other educators, because the thing is with trying to kind of bring games or game elements into the classroom. I mean, to some extent, what you're getting into is kind of getting into a design space, and a lot of teachers aren't necessarily familiar with the design space. So I think kind of taking us behind the curtain a little bit and kind of showing how you had these kind of game elements and how you were kind of like tinkering with them behind the curtain, I think is immensely useful and instructive for people.
Cool. That is very reassuring. Thank you. Good. All right. So then, let's go ahead and take a look at the character sheet. So I'll yeah, before we start plugging stuff in here, let me just note some things that, like I said, that I pulled out from Dungeon World and stuck in from other places. So I think it will be helpful for actually filling this thing out to know what these things are doing. So what we've got on here, on this character sheet page, I'll just quickly kind of point to what's there to fill in. So in the kind of upper left here, we've got a place to put your name, your pronouns, a place to put your character's name and their pronouns. To the right are basically token trackers. PT stands for player token, CT stands for character token. On the one hand, this is something I've stolen from the Belonging Outside of Belonging game space. So this is Avery Alder's kind of Belonging Outside of Belonging, no dice, no masters game. It uses a token economy. So that's what I've used for this. I started out using dice, just like a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games. It was fun, but I still had those moments where, like, even though something was happening on a miss, on a 6-, it slowed down the learning. I took the dice out and started using these tokens. I was noticing in the classroom that they were slowing things down at points, but at a conference, I had a participant just put it to me point blank, and he asked, like, what are the dice doing? That, he pointed out that, yes, they're fun, but pedagogically, it's not clear they're doing anything. And I sat down and I thought about it, and I realized that what the students are doing there luck should not be a factor. If they offer a good argument for something, their characters should do it. That's the whole point of the game, is to get them thinking about why should their characters be doing something. And if they can tell me why, then the dice should not tell them that they don't do it, right? And so I swapped in this token system. So when we play, there will be a way for your characters to earn tokens. You will earn tokens by demonstrating that you've understood the material, and you will spend tokens to do things and get to basically narrate the fiction. So let me flip back to my sheet here. All right. Also, like, in just a straight kind of nod to kind of pedagogy, I've also started using in the classroom specification grading. Are you all familiar with it? Show of hands if you are. No? So specification grading, the idea here is that instead of giving like a A to F, 0% to 100% grading scale, you do everything satisfactory, unsatisfactory. You set satisfactory at what you would probably judge to be like an 80%, a B. And in terms of earning grades, it's all about how much of the content you can master. And so you bundle together assignments. Assignments might have more what you consider to be kind of require higher learning, have more difficult material in them. If students complete those, they get, what would translate to an A. Maybe you've got students who just need to pass your class. Well, they're going to aim for the bundles that don't have those types of assignments. They have bundles that maybe require less of their time, so they can spend more time working on a class that's in their major, for example. Part of this system, the educator's name who developed this is escaping me at the moment. I'll find it at the break. She said that it can be a very unforgiving system. And so you want to build in some way that they can buy out mistakes. And so she suggests giving students a couple of tokens at the beginning of the semester. So that way, if they have a bad assignment, they can spend a token to drop that bad assignment. It won't affect their overall grade. And so I found a way to not only use this kind of specification grading for my typical kind of assignments, but also to work it into the game so that students, by playing the game really well and like showing that they've mastered the material, can earn these tokens to then affect their coursework. Aaron, you want to share what you put in the chat there?
Sorry, yeah, I didn't mean to distract. I use something similar. It's called contract grading. Essentially, you make a list of the things that are just minimum requirements to achieve a B. So rather than trying to, rather than every assignment being a sort of zero-sum game, this allows students to experiment a little bit more. So just turning in the assignment is the thing. It works particularly well. I teach in English, so it works particularly well with revisions and drafts where you're requiring them to respond to or learn from a previous iteration of something, where you know that learning is built into the structure of assignments. It doesn't work so well with just a one-off paper here or there or an exam, but the same kind of thing. Like, here's a baseline, don't worry. If you do these things, you're fine. But also gives you the ability to move up too. So you can satisfy the baseline, but also achieve more in various ways.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, go for it, John.
In K-12, in high school, I have worked with colleagues to create exams and assessments that have explicitly coded it's almost like the assignment is leveled, right? Like everything here it's coded green. It's something that every single person in class ought to know and should have no trouble struggling. You shouldn't be struggling with it, right? And if you do that work, you're going to get a B- or whatever. Everything here in yellow is going to be sort of a stretch, perhaps, and then I'm going to give one or two questions that I'm going to code red that are, by design, really, really brain busters, right? And you can try reds without, you only benefit from trying a red, right? Because from my perspective, I'm working with highly privileged, very fragile, very wealthy, risk-averse families, right? And I don't feel it's right to let them graduate being as fragile as they are. Robbie, I'm sure what I'm speaking about is something that you know in your day-to-day life experience, right? So if you present a challenge and you explicitly identify it as one and they try it and it works or it doesn't, then they at least get to experience what it feels like to stretch and reach, right? So we could probably do a whole 3 hours, 6 hours on grading and fragility in Generation Z, but let's not.
That's probably wise. And as Cedar pointed out, I have some of this stuff in the syllabus. I'll just say right now, though, that what I've done here, like does not sound like my specification grading does not sound like I've as anywhere near as intricate as what either Aaron or John have talked about here. So I'm taking tentative steps into specification grading. So if you look at my syllabus, you probably won't see anything too interesting. But yeah, Sudo's right, it is in there. All right, cool. So back to our character sheet. We've got our names, our tokens. Beneath that, there's a set of boxes where you have your character's ethnicity, gender, a prominent physical trait, and a prominent personality or mental trait. So I'll say a little bit. So the traits, the body trait and the mental trait, on the one hand, these are to give the students a chance to personalize their characters, kind of start thinking about who their character is. And also it gives them a chance, you'll see when we look at the moves in a second here, that when you make moves, you can bring your traits in to actually pull those moves off better. So if you can pull your trait into what you're doing, you get to describe the fiction. So it's another way to kind of allow it to encourage the students to be creative and to get engaged with the game. The ethnicity, this is my attempt to try to deal with some of the problems in our fantasy role-playing games, and I'm sure you're all familiar with at this point, dealing with race in gaming. What I've done here is, in this particular iteration, and this is something that keeps changing every semester, but what I've got right now is that I've got what would be your typical kind of fantasy medieval D&D races. So there is the dwarf, the elf, the halfling. I've got a goblin, and then I've got humans. I'm treating them not as biological races, whatever that would mean, but rather as culturally constructed ethnicities. So that the dwarves are coming from a dwarven culture. The elves are coming from an elven culture. So whatever we decide dwarves are, it's about the culture they're bringing to the table. You can, of course, say in your physical trait that, hey, my dwarf is short. Cool. Lean into that trope. But what we're emphasizing is not so much that stuff, but rather whatever culture they're bringing in. In this iteration, I've also tied the ethical theories into the cultures. So instead of having, goblins that are always lawful evil, we've got goblins that are always contract theorists. Or at least they tend to be contract theorists because that's the culture they grew up in, right? And so that's what I'm doing at this moment. It probably doesn't answer all of the worries that are especially being voiced right now. I don't know how active you all are in tabletop Twitter, but like it feels like every 3 weeks it erupts again. So this is my attempt right now to kind of address these issues. I will note, I picked up something that I've not had a chance to read too closely yet, but someone just published something for 5e called like Ancestry and Culture, I think. I'll look for it at the break, but it is an explicit attempt to pull this problematic stuff out of D&D and put culture and kind of ancestry in there. The dude who wrote it, and again, I'll look this up, he is an ethicist in academia. So he is bringing some of these same issues that I want to bring in the classroom into this. So it might be helpful for you, and I'll look that up at the break. All right. And then for our gender, you'll see when you do your character creation here that it defaults to man, woman, or non-binary. You are, of course, you can edit it in there. So you can get more specific so that it's not just some amorphous non-binary. You can put in there agender, genderqueer, whatever, or anything outside of those three kind of things that it defaults to. And again, all that stuff is just to get the students kind of into their character. The other traits here, we probably won't end up doing much with those. And this is, again, something new, but and this is something that I stole from the session that I played with Robbie when we played the pool. So what this is, you see those 10 traits there, those 10 other traits. Those are actually the topics that we go over in the course. So those are the 10 topics that we deal with. And what the students will do this next semester is that after every topic, they're going to write a short, 100-word response to the topic. And then from their 100-word response, they're going to write a phrase or a short sentence that describes some trait about themselves that they've pulled from that response they've written to the topic. And again, this is something that came from Robbie ran the pool for a group of us, I think a couple months ago now. And and Robbie, feel free to jump in here, but one of the mechanics of that was during character creation, we wrote 150 words about our character. And from that, we could pull traits for our character to roleplay. And so I've stolen that mechanic and shoved it in here. Does that sound about a fair description, Robbie?
Yeah, I mean the pool that really is the character creation, right? It's a game where, unlike the way we think about a lot of role-playing games where you have kind of set attributes and things like that established by the game, in the pool, usually what happens is the group or perhaps the game master says, okay, we're going to play a game in this setting. And the first thing the players do is they sit down and write a really concise little character sketch. And it's out of that character sketch that they then kind of pull out the kind of attributes of their character. So it's I find it's a really kind of cool system, and it allows the players to have a lot of say then in terms of defining both who their character is, as well as what those kind of key attributes that will come into the gameplay will be, right? So if you say, okay, my character is it could be anything, right? My character is effective at haggling, right? And if you want to make that part of the gameplay now, you can kind of then take that out and define that as one of your key attributes.
Yeah, and I thought that was, when we played it, I thought that was really interesting, and I hope, and we'll see what happens this semester, that having the students write these kind of reflective, just real short 100-word blurbs on the topic to start to summarize their thoughts on what they thought was most important. And then from that 100 words, pulling out like just a short phrase or sentence that now describes something about their character. I'm hoping that all of that will really get them to think about these ethics and these arguments in a way that they haven't really thought about them before. So, okay. But like I said, we probably won't, since we're going to be doing a little bit of reading before next time and actually doing one of these topics next time, we probably won't get a chance to actually play that out. But just be aware that's there. All right, right-hand column. On the right here, we've got information for our groups. Now in my classes, I typically have 25 students. I break those students down into 5 groups of 5. The first group they get is their adventuring party. So each group is numbered 1 through 5. Each party, they name their party. So I give them examples from some of my favorites. You've got the Fellowship of the Ring. You've got, I don't know if you're all familiar with Rat Queens. It's a wonderful graphic novel. So they name their party. In that party, they each get an occupation, and they will eventually become one of these 5 professionals. So that party's mixed. Everybody in that party has a different occupation that will become one of these artificer, paladin, cleric, merchant, or wizard. The second group they get is another group of 5 students, but they all have the same profession. So you've got a guild of artificers, a guild of paladins, a guild of merchants, a guild of clerics, and a guild of wizards. And depending on what activity we're doing, they'll either be in their party or their guild. If it's an activity that has to do with, say if we're reading a piece to understand that author's argument, they'll be in their party because their ethic is not as important there. If we're doing an activity where I want them to think about, well, what would your ethics say here? Then they're in their guild. And so once you all here in character creation start creating your characters, we'll know kind of what numbers to put in there and what to do. Obviously, we'll probably, I guess we can decide at the end of the day what we want to do. I had imagined we would just do an adventuring party and do one of those types of activities. If we did a guild, everybody would be in the same guild. We can try that if people want to, but we can talk about that at the end here. Conditions. So one of the things, I have taken health out of the game. I've tried to take combat out of the game as much as possible. I started doing that last year. You'll see when you start doing your characters here, the only characters that have weapons that begin with are those who will become paladins. That's because they are the analog to the legal profession, which is the arm of the coercive state. So they are the only ones that have weapons. Nobody else does at the beginning. And I've been trying to play down combat and all of this as much as possible, because it never fails that the gamers in the classroom who have played typically 5e want to hack and slash my class, which is pretty antithetical. They figure out pretty fast that it's antithetical to the game. Sometimes in counterproductive ways. I think the most interesting was we had a session where a group of gnolls came out of a door. The door was a door to I believe it was a public defender's office. The characters didn't stop to talk to them, though. They just attacked the gnolls. kill the gnolls, who were the clients of the public defender. So then I had to bring in the local police to arrest them, and like that kind of spun the game off in a direction it wasn't supposed to go. But like I mean, as much fun as that was for both me and the students, like it was kind of counterproductive to the learning. So in addition to taking combat out as much as possible and taking kind of weapons out, I've also taken health out. So now instead we're doing conditions. And so what we're going to do in this game is that if something does happen, combat or otherwise, that would negatively affect your character, we're going to think of a condition, so a label, some sort of description that we can give to your character that describes how their rational thinking has been impaired in some way. Because the game is all about making arguments, it made sense to me that instead of it being about physical health, it should be about some sort of like mental capacity in some way, and making it so you're, I don't know, confused, for example, angry, something that a traditional kind of philosopher that we're talking about would think of as a block to rational thinking. Putting that in there as the condition, I think gets it both kind of a game mechanic that I want to still have in there, as well as the pedagogy that I'm trying to teach them. So what we're going to do is if you get into some sort of, again, either physical or other sort of altercation that gives you a condition, we're going to figure out what that is that's impairing your rational thinking. If you get 2 of those, you're knocked out of a scene. There are ways to heal those. And if we have a cleric, the cleric will be able to say a prayer that will heal whatever is blocking your rational thinking. So that's what that part of the character keeper is. Last but not least, we've got our gear and an image for our character. And that is my lecture on my first page of my character sheet. We ready to just create characters? I feel like I'm talking too much. So what we do to do this, so I've made this kind of auto-generated.
Hey,
oh, yeah, go for it.
I have a quick question. So when you're doing it in class, to make sure that you have enough like diversity in your party and as well as guilds, do you basically do you group the kids beforehand, like and say, hey, I need 5. You have to choose one of these guilds previous to doing any other character creation, or you kind of let them have the freedom to do what they want to do? I'm just thinking on a number stance.
Yeah, so what I've settled on doing, and this is what I've done at least the last year, if not longer now. So the first day of class, I pass around sets of percentile dice. Everybody rolls a number. If they roll 0 to 20, they're in group 1, 21 to 40, group 2, so on and so forth. So that way that gets the kind of spread. That's their adventuring party. Once they're there, I then tell them, look, you're eventually going to become one of these 5 professions. Decide amongst yourself who wants to be what. And so we talk a little bit about what each one's going to be, what it means to pick it, so they know. And, you know, if they, for example, if an engineering student wants to be the artificer, cool, right? If a student who's doing supply chain wants to be the merchant, awesome. Sometimes the engineering student wants to be the wizard, doesn't want to have to deal with engineering in this class like they do all their other classes, right? But that's kind of how I've settled on doing it. So random to get them into their groups and then kind of let them decide who they're going to be. Does that answer the question, Brandon? Cool. But luckily we only have, we have 6. I think, Robbie, you had said that you were going to observe. Are you going to play?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to you, really. I mean, if you want me to play, I'm fine with that. But I mean, I was thinking about, like, you know, usually online play, you know, a group of 6 is a bit much a lot of times for the online play. So,
well, why don't we? So I'll run the other 5 like I typically would a group. And you go ahead and make a character. You can just make whatever you want.
Yeah.
And that way, if you want to jump in, you can. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Awesome. All right.
And before going on, John, did you have a question earlier?
Ryan did not see.
Sorry, I've been like
I was
juggling tabs and.
No, I was throwing a lifeline to my fellow teacher, lest Brandon was frozen.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, sorry, I've had overlapping tabs and I've been missing like half of the camera at times. All right, let's do some playing here. Let's make some characters. So I've made this sheet so that it populates a lot of the information itself. I think you all can see the data tabs that are there. I left those. I'm going to hide them for the students, but I left them for you so you could, if you were interested, you could see kind of what data is all in there. So it does auto-populate a lot of stuff here, but you are free. I'll tell you what you're free to kind of choose if you like. First thing we're going to do, though, we got to figure out professions. And so, like I said, Robbie has free reign here to choose whatever he wants, but we got to lock everybody else into a profession. So we'll start with, I'll just describe them real fast and we'll see if anybody's interested in something. So we've got our artificer. In these kind of D&D-like games, our artificer is sort of like an arcane engineer. It's very similar in my game. You basically the fantasy medieval engineer. I tell my students that in our game, magic is just science that we don't yet understand. So they're basically working with science, but they call it magic. So for that character, it is the kind of the analog to the engineering profession. For our cleric, in D&D, this is our spellcaster who says prayers of healing. It's again the same in World of Professionals, but this is the analog to the medical profession. For the merchants, that one's pretty self-explanatory. That is the analog for the business professions. The paladin, who in our D&D-like games is sort of like our knight on a mission, going on quests and the like. Also has like a religious component, typically in D&D-like games. For World of Professionals, I downplay the religious element. I keep that just for the cleric. And so the paladin is just basically a knight, and they are the analog to the legal profession. And the wizard spellcaster is the analog to the education professions, teaching and helping professions. So those are our 5. Did any of those jump out to anybody? Does anybody want to claim one?
Well, if nobody's going to speak up, I'll claim the wizard.
Awesome. We got our wizard.
It was there, John. You could have claimed it.
You select that, tons of stuff will auto-populate, and we'll see what that does.
It's all good, baby.
I'm flexible, so somebody else can go.
I'll take the artist.
All right, so Brandon's going to play our artificer.
Patrick.
Yeah, I'll take merchant.
All right.
So what does that leave for Aaron and me?
You got a cleric and a paladin.
Paladin.
All right, I'll leave Aaron with our cleric. Awesome. All right, so when you pick one of those, tons of stuff kind of auto-populates in there, or at least it should. Oh, no, it doesn't. That's right, I'm missing a step. Now we need to go over and pick our occupation. So every profession's got 5 occupations to choose from. And this, choose whatever you want. None of this will overlap, so you can just pick whichever one you like. And then we get some stuff to auto-populate. So, although it does fill in this stuff, so this is mostly to give students who are not familiar with this gaming an idea of what kind of stuff should go in here. you are free to change any of this except for the gear that auto-populates. Everything else you can change. We need to leave the gear as it is. Obviously, you've chosen your profession and your occupation. But, I mean, it auto-populates a name, some pronouns, gender, ethnicity, all that stuff. You can change any of that stuff. Like I said, I do it for the students who've never played this type of game before and they just aren't quite sure what kind of stuff they should be putting in here. For the longest time, I didn't realize that students who weren't familiar with this, when I said elf, were imagining Christmas elves. And it didn't dawn on me until the last thing they do for the class, because so this course is they get like a public speaking credit for it. And so I used to do like just the typical sort of presentation. I kind of framed it as a narrative. Tell me a story about your character when they faced an ethical problem. Now what they're doing instead is constructing their own dungeon crawls. But when they were doing those narratives, I was getting all these stories about Christmas elves. That's when it dawned on me, like this whole semester they've been thinking about elves in that sense. So anyway, all right. So I think what we'll do, let's go ahead and just leave whatever it auto-populates for now so we can talk about the rest of the stuff on the character keeper, on the character sheet here. I'm guessing, looking at the clock here, we're coming up on probably a break pretty soon, which probably means we won't actually play anything today, like actually play an adventure. And so I think if you want to change stuff, and again, you're more than encouraged to do so, we'll just do it kind of in between the two sessions if you want to like rename your character, change the ethnicity, the gender, any of that stuff, the traits, any of that. Does that sound good? Cool. All right. So, go for it, John.
Ryan, I'm looking. So I selected Paladin from the profession dropdown, and I have to pop over to occupation and pick one of the 5. 4 of the words I can discern what they are, but this word catchpole, I've never heard that, or I've heard it as something, I don't know what that is. So
no. So thank you for the question, because that reminds me so yeah, 2 things there. One, so the villager stuff here I have stolen from a Dungeon World. I don't know if I would call it a supplement or not, but it's called Funnel World.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody's familiar with that. Funnel World is itself sort of a riff on Dungeon Crawl Classics, which is another game system. John's heard of that. Dungeon Crawl Classics, they do often they do what they call a funnel, where you generate all of these 0-level villagers and throw them through like this meat grinder dungeon and see who survives. I stole that idea for this class because when they play the game, they start out as these 0. I used to do XP and levels. I don't do that anymore, but they started out as 0-level villagers. And the idea there is that they're learning to become their profession, so that about halfway through the class, they actually level up and become the profession. That's why in your character sheet there, it says next to occupation that you are this occupation, and next to profession that you will be this thing. Because you're not yet that profession. Right now, you're that occupation. At the middle of the course, we actually talk about what it means to be a professional. We read some philosophers who talk about kind of like, or I guess, speculate about why professions emerged from occupations, what it means to be a profession, what it means to be a good professional, et cetera, et cetera. So a catchpole is one of the medieval occupations that I stole from Funnel World. I had to look it up as well. A catchpole is another term for a tax collector, which is why the catchpole, if you choose it, I believe has a census with them. In these Dungeon Crawl Classic Funnel World games, the villagers get all this ridiculous gear that's probably not going to be all that helpful in a dungeon crawl, but it's stuff they would have had with them if they'd been kidnapped or whatever. I don't think the original Funnel World catchpole had a census. I think I added that, but yes, it is a tax collector. If anybody else has any weird occupations they don't know, feel free to ask. I'm guessing I've had to look those up as well because there's a ton of them in there that we just don't use anymore.
I was just looking at the etymology of catchpole because I also wasn't really familiar with it, but at least according to Wikipedia, the pole is from polis, meaning the chicken, and the idea that for the tax collector to try to get somebody, like track them down to get them to pay their taxes was equivalent of trying to run after a chicken in the farmyard and try to catch the chicken running away from you.
Let's pop over to some of this other stuff here. So the next tab is our agendas and principles. Again, this is something that I've stolen from Powered by the Apocalypse. Most of the games have agenda and principles just for the GM. There are a couple that have them for players. I know Fellowship is one of them. I can't think of any others off the top of my head. If you all know of any, feel free to chime in. But agenda and principles are meant, so agenda is kind of like the, in the traditional Powered by the Apocalypse, the agenda for the GM was their big picture stuff they wanted to keep in mind. It was like kind of the meta organizational ideas to keep in mind. And there were just 3. They're different for every game, but there's typically about 3 of those. What I've done here is I've made kind of an agenda for my students. You'll see if you look at the old material that I stuck in the folder from my previous semester, these are listed as player principles in those playbooks. I made them full-fledged agenda items for this online version. And so they're pretty self-explanatory. They're just little things that I want my students to keep in mind. When it comes to the actual kind of, I'm attempting to write this into a textbook sort of thing for the students. I'll flesh these out. But they're nothing more than just ideas that I want the students to be aiming towards as they play the game. So just real quick here, we've got be curious, be skeptical, be logical, be wise, be charitable, be humble, be brave, and be ethical. I think I'll just say this real quick. I think for philosophy classes, I think all these are important, obviously, or else they wouldn't be there. But I think for students first coming to philosophy, the be charitable and the be humble are probably like the 2 most important. Because when they get in these discussions, they can take things really personally, and B, when they start to defend a point, dig in and keep defending it, even if like it starts to look really bad. Instead of saying like, hey, thanks for that, you really improved my argument, they just dig in. And so like those 2, if you're thinking about doing this type of kind of like thing in your classes, I think highlighting those things for your students are like, for me, those are 2 big ones. To always, take what people say in the best way possible, and to realize that, you might be wrong and this person's actually helping you out and not trying to tear you down. So those are our big kind of organizing agenda items. Go for it.
So for the agenda, it seems to me, are these entirely for the player, or is it also informing the decisions that the character is making as well?
Yeah, it's meant to be serving a dual purpose. So it is like, especially like those last 2, be brave and be ethical, they actually mention going on adventures. And so, yeah, they are meant to be, on the one hand, agenda items for players approaching philosophy and approaching the class, but on the other hand, how they want to play their characters. So their characters also, like, as philosophers, they want to be brave and consider ideas that might challenge what they believe and think, scary ideas, right? But also they want their characters to be brave and go on these adventures. So yeah, no, it's a good question. Does that make sense?
For that, does that mean that everybody's on the same page, that all of the players and their characters are acting ethically within the game? And is that like everybody then just lawful good sort of aligned?
So
yeah.
No, that makes no. So yes, they're all acting ethically. we could get, although this might be another one of those topics that we could talk about for 3 to 6 hours, but I would argue that they're not all lawful good, even though they're all ethical. So, I mean, real quick, just to diverge into this, when I first threw this game at my students back in that spring of 16, I did leave the alignments in there and tied the ethics to them as best I could. So, for example, the Hobbesian to me is just like straight up neutral, like lawful neutral, probably, right? Hobbesians aren't good. They're certainly kind of, but yeah, so the Hobbesians were lawful neutral. Kant, I think maybe lawful neutral, maybe lawful good. So like even if we were doing like standard alignments, they wouldn't all be lawful good. But like to the more general point, they are all ethical, which is also something that I've done this with younger students, so not students in my class, but kind of like at to introduce high school students to like what they might be interested in at college. And the high school students really want to play evil characters, and it's the gamers anyway. And I'm like, well, no, we don't have evil characters in this game. Like we are all ethical characters, right? So yeah, that is, some of the gamers want to do it, but you got to kind of push them towards it. So we will all be ethical in some sense, even if not lawful good, all ethical. Cool. Other questions? Does that answer the question, Patrick?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. All right, so down from our agenda, we got principles. This is just one step down, but these are more or less the rules of the game. This is the stuff that you want to do as a player. So as I tell my students, what we're doing here is we're telling a story together. You've got moves that your character can make, which we'll talk about in a second. But really, we're just telling a story. I'm going to set a scene. You're going to tell me what your character does. And I'm going to occasionally say, oh, that sounds like you're doing this move. Why don't you do this for me? Right? And so it always starts with the fiction. We then go into like the mechanics, which then feed back into the fiction. Right? So first up, narrate what your character does and make moves. Ask questions. In the game, I'm flagging to my students that part of what we're doing here, both the game and in philosophy, is asking questions of each other and answering questions. Right? Describe your character. This is my way of telling the students that while they're playing, get into your character, like be your character. Along with that, address the other characters as a similar sort of principle. Like when you're talking to the other, when you're in game, you're not. I'm not going to say like, hey, Patrick, what does your character do? I'm going to call out Patrick's character's name, right? And the players are going to do the same thing. And so both to describe your character and address the other characters keeps us in that fiction first sort of mindset. Focus on the fiction makes that explicit. So everything the character does comes from and leads back to the fiction. Last but not least, the spotlight principle. This is to kind of remind the players. It's both for those who want to talk a lot and those who don't want to talk at all. It's to remind those who want to talk a lot that like, hey, sometimes other players have the spotlight. And so when they do, let them narrate what's going on before you jump in and add whatever your contribution is. Likewise, for the students who are a bit more shy and don't, aren't going to take that initiative, is to remind them that, hey, when it's your turn, go by these principles, play your character, tell the story. So we've got our meta agenda. We step down from that. We've got our principles, which are more or less the rules of the game. I'm going to jump over to the basic moves tab now. This is how we play. These are the moves that our characters will make as we're narrating the fiction. So we've got 6. I've broken this down into 2 basic activities that I do in this game. Dungeon crawls are more or less gamified reading quizzes. I take a reading and I create a dungeon from it. Students have that same reading to do before class. If they've done the reading and halfway understood it, they come to class, talk with the others, and they can solve the puzzles in this dungeon crawl and escape the dungeon. The dungeon crawls are usually set up with the idea that you're searching for some sort of artifact. So they're in this dungeon to find artifacts and knowledge, and then to find their way out. So we've got our 6 moves here. And some of these are just, again, they're just to kind of give students who have never played this type of game before, kind of, if they don't know what to do, they can look at this list and be like, oh, here's what I can do. So some of them might seem kind of silly. Like the first one is just do something. And it reads, when you want to do something, do it. Right. And the idea here is just to tell the students, look, narrate what your character does. I'll tell you if you can do it or not. Right. You'll notice there it's got some jargon kind of in parentheses behind it. It says plus trait plus 1 CT. That means that if you use one of your traits when you're doing something, you'll earn a character token. And so this is the flag to the players like, hey, bring those traits in here, play your character, and you'll get a token. The other thing that's in that parenthesis is plus hint minus 1 CT. This is if the character's just really stuck or they don't know what to do. The player can ask the GM, hey, what should I be doing here? And they can spend a token to do that. And I will, as the GM, honestly give them a hint and say, well, hey, maybe you want to go look at that chest over there. Or maybe you want to go talk to that person over there. So that's our first move. Talk to others, same sort of thing. When you want to talk to an NPC, talk. And it's got the same sort of incentive there. Use a trait, get a token. Need a hint, spend a token. Discern reality is our just straightforward. I've just more or less ripped this off from Dungeon World. When you closely study someone or something, describe what you're doing and why. I used to have the questions in here from Dungeon World, but I felt like they were a bit too constraining for what my students wanted to do. So I just took the questions out, and now they can ask any question they want, basically. So if they're looking at a chest and trying to figure out if it's trapped, they can just tell me that's what I'm trying to do. And again, use a trait, get a token, need a hint, spend a token. Solve a puzzle is another one of those ones that's kind of like do something or talk to others. It's just a flag to the students, like you're supposed to be solving puzzles here. Most of my puzzles, and you'll see this next time, they're sort of like concept puzzles. So it's like matching concepts, filling in words that are missing from phrases, things like that. And they're all solvable by having done the reading and knowing kind of what concepts I'm trying to get at. It's kind of like, in your standard sort of like when you're a DM and you're constructing a dungeon, and it's some dungeon that's got this like trap at the beginning or some sort of puzzle to the first door that adventurers just haven't been able to solve to get into this dungeon. That's kind of the idea here. The last 2, we've got aid your friends. And so this is a way for, if students don't have tokens and somebody else in the party does, they can be creative and help out that person by spending one of their tokens if it works in the fiction. And then defy danger is, again, kind of just lifted from Dungeon World. When you avoid an immediate threat, describe what you're doing and choose. And this is just like the aid your friends. I didn't describe this part, but they work the same way. If you use a trait or spend a token, then whatever's trying to happen succeeds and they get to narrate it. If they don't have a trait or a token, I narrate what happens. And it's indicated there. It says the GM will tell you how you succeed and the price that you pay. So they always succeed, even if they don't have a token or a trait. But it's going to defy danger. It's going to put them in a bad spot. If they're aiding their friends, they're going to maybe lose something from their gear that they've broken in the process or something like that. So they're always going to succeed, but if they don't have a token or a trait, they're going to pay some sort of price outside of that system. And those are our 6 dungeon crawl moves. Any thoughts or questions on those? Nope. All right. The other set of moves here, it still depends on what you all want to do next time. The other type of activity that we do in class is the gamified thought experiment or case study. And this is more or less a discussion that the students have from the point of view of their characters. So it's much less gamified. It's much less kind of D&D. It's more the way that it's set up. And the students now actually write these themselves. So it's an assignment that I give them. They have to gamify a case study and then present it to their group and then have the discussion. But what the moves are here, it's just kind of a cobbled together, it's just basically me telling the students how to have a philosophical conversation. So all 24 of these moves are things that you can do in a philosophical discussion. Some of them are specific to the actual activity. So the first 4, apply your ethic, identify the problem, identify stakeholders, identify solution. That's all specific to doing a gamified case study. Right? Using a monster encounter to illustrate a claim, that's just using an example to illustrate something. Situating a claim in the literature, this is me trying to get the students used to citing their sources. The next 6 are really just real basic ways to construct an argument. I'm not going to go through all of them. You all can read them on your own there, but it's just real basic kind of stuff that you teach students in critical thinking and basic logic. The last 12 there, I think more or less, those I've lifted from a colleague who kindly allowed me to steal these. What is Rebecca's last name? I'm going to tell you all so you could follow her on Twitter if you wanted. She also does D&D in the classroom. She actually was tweeting about her experiments from this past spring. She's been doing something that sounds super interesting with using Discord with her students now that we've all gone online. See if I can find her real fast here on my Twitter. Yeah, stopped. Go ahead and put her handle in the chat here in case you're interested. If I can get back to our chat, there we go. So these last 12 moves that I've taken from her, she uses in her class, and she did not create these for doing games in the classroom. But she called them discussion moves. And as soon as I saw them and thought about what I was doing, I was like, I have to steal these because these fit so perfectly in what I'm trying to get my students to do. And they really are. I mean, like, they're just the greatest little tips for like how to have a philosophical discussion. Like these are literally things that we do, but they're distilled down in these short little phrases. They're just perfect. So that's all the monster encounter moves are. It's me trying to show the students how to have a philosophical conversation. And like I said, I don't know if we'll use those. It depends on what we want to do next time. I'll jump over to the advanced move tab. This is super work in progress. Some of you won't even see stuff like, oh, there are some moves that aren't filled out at all for everybody. And some people have even less than others because this is like still being worked out. But what this is, so everybody has an advanced dungeon crawl move. This is something that once you've found your artifact and you are your profession, this is the cool thing that you can do that nobody else can do. So the artificer builds a thing, the paladin enforces the law, the merchant makes a trade, the cleric says a prayer, and the wizard says a spell, or casts a spell. And they have the same sort of, they have a same sort of structure as the other moves, but they ask for a little bit more. All of them not only require this artifact, but they require you to actually kind of make a little mini argument using your ethic. So all of them say to like have a parenthetical in there somewhere that says plus ethic plus 1 character token. And so these moves literally will not work if you can't use your ethic correctly. So unlike the other moves, I think almost all of the, except for solve a puzzle, all of those will succeed. Some of the cost maybe, but they'll all succeed. Solve a puzzle, which requires you to have understood the literature, the reading, won't always succeed. And this one that you get now that requires you to make an argument with your ethic won't always succeed because you've got to actually apply your ethic correctly. So everybody's got one of those. Some people have an additional one. For example, the artificer has one called blow the whistle. And it reads, actually, Aaron, you want to read it Brandon, you want to read it for us?
Yeah. All right. It says, when you blow Martin's whistle to warn the public of a deadly hazard, explain all things considered judgment that you made to do so. Cool.
So that one again requires you to make an argument, have the artifact, you get a token. I think everybody sees there the monster encounter moves that go along with that. So it is moves 29 through 32. So on the one hand, they get the artificers get this artifact. They get this move that's tied to this professional problem of whistle blowing, and then everybody has these new monster encounter moves. That when we're discussing whistleblowing, I now give them 4 things from our reading that they can use in their discussion. And so when this is complete, everybody's going to have their own kind of professional problem move. And then there will be 4 new monster encounter moves to go along with it. I don't remember who else has one right now. Does anybody else anybody else have 2 dungeon crawl moves on that advanced moves page? Nobody. I thought somebody else did.
Yeah, I did the Paladin Catchpole, which has enforce the law and then address a conflict.
Yeah, do you want to read that one off for us?
So the address a conflict says, when you enforce the law while wearing Davis's ring, explain how an NPC's judgment is compromised and what actions they should take, plus argument and plus character token. The GM will tell you what happens.
Yeah. And so that all goes along with monster encounter moves 33 through 36, which are all about conflicts of interest. The first row there, 25 through 28, that has to do with your ethic. So whatever ethic you are, 25 to 28 are different for everybody too. So for the artificer, it's all about utilitarianism. For the paladin, it's all about Kantianism. For the merchant, it's all about contractarianism. For the cleric, it's all about the ethic of care. And for the wizard, it's all about Aristotelian virtue ethics. And again, it's me just trying, obviously these ethics are way more complicated than this, but it's me trying to pick out like 4 really important things that you need to keep in mind when you're making arguments using your ethic. And I think that gets us our character keeper. So, any questions about either the basic or the advanced moves, or any thoughts pop up about those?
So just so I understand, everybody's basic move page is the same, correct?
Correct.
But everybody's advanced move page relies on what profession you are.
For the dungeon crawls, and for the dungeon crawl moves, yes, and for the first row of the monster encounter moves.
Okay.
The remaining rows of the monster encounter moves, those will be the same for everybody.
Okay.
But yes, for the dungeon crawl moves and for the first row of the monster encounter, they depend on your profession.
One thing that I'm not seen it in practice, obviously, but one recommendation that I might make is the basic moves. What I love about the basic moves is that it effectively follows the same pattern, right? Use your trade, get a token, get a hint, lose a token, right? Like that's the basic economy. Mm-hmm. It feels like those basic moves actually aren't entirely necessary, right? All you need is do something, and do something could be talk to an NPC, discern reality, solve a puzzle, and then let the advanced moves start to help students to think through what are the kinds of questions that I would ask as an artificer? What are the kinds of questions that I would ask as a Kantian or whatever, right? So my question is, you've run this before, do you find that students get lost in the number of options that they have? Because you're talking about a series of basic moves, as well as a series of like character traits and profiles, as well as a sort of order that they're supposed to tackle things. Do they get lost in that, or is it fine? And I'm just making something up.
So there was a version where the villager only had the do something move. And it felt like students, especially those who'd never played before, didn't know what to do, which is why they get more. And you're right, you could boil down all those basic moves just to do something, which is why I tried it that semester. So yeah, all of those others are basically there to tell this to flag to the students like, hey, these are the kinds of things you can do. The advanced, so there used to be, so let me back up. The monster encounter moves, that's new to this semester. So we'll see if that's like piling on too much stuff for them to look at. The reason I did that though is just because it felt like, of course, like obviously like for any class you've got like the handful of like really like the stellar students. You've got the couple that are falling through the cracks, and then most everybody else is somewhere in the middle, right? It felt like on the monster encounters, those really stellar students had no problem. Like they were doing exactly what they needed to do without any of these moves. And again, there's always some students you need to help out, but everybody in the middle also kind of felt like they just weren't quite getting it because they didn't quite know. They maybe got like for the Kantian, yeah, I need to universalize stuff, but then they wouldn't remember anything else. And so that's why there's so much stuff there. And so it's possible I've swung too far in the other direction and I'm giving them way too much stuff. I do like the idea though, and I've tried some ways of doing this and it hasn't worked yet. I don't think there's a real attempt yet here, but to get them to actually like create their own moves or like ask their own questions or do their own thing. Everything I've tried has kind of like just not worked, and not worked in the sense of like they've just not engaged with it. Like they don't know what to do with it. That's how most of this stuff, like when it doesn't work, it's not so much that it like doesn't work in the game. It doesn't work in the sense that they just don't understand it, right? Because I haven't written it in a way that it makes sense for them. But I do like that idea of maybe finding an advanced move that does get them in some way to like be creative with the ethic, because ultimately that's, as a side note, that is like my current research project, because I feel like my initial aim was to get students engaged and to get them to apply ethics, like kind of just like the baseline, right? I feel like I've done that. And now it's to get them to do that high order thinking, to actually engage with the ethic and do the type of work the philosophers do. And so that's my current like actual research project is that. And so I hadn't really thought about it in the way that you described it. So I think that'll be like, that's really helpful. And if anybody's got any other ideas on how that might happen, that would be awesome. But yeah, you're right. Something needs to happen there with like, as an advanced move to like actually make the ethic your own in some way.
I wonder if the model of the Forged in the Dark model might work there, where you have like an investigation time, then the heist time, and then the downtime. Like the investigation is figuring out the questions that you need to ask or the kinds of places that you would need to go to find the information that you need. The heist is the encounter, the solving of the problem, and the downtime is the reflection on that, maybe. Did the information that you searched for yield a solution to the problem, or was it a red herring, or those kinds of questions?
So
I'm just talking off the top of my head.
Yeah, so I'm going to lose some tabletop cred here. I've never played Forge in the Dark games. Like, I've read enough to know the terms that you're using, so I know what you're referring to, but I've not yet played one. So that's a super helpful suggestion for me to actually go and not just for my gaming knowledge, but for my pedagogical knowledge, because that sounds like it maps really well on something you would want students to do, research an activity, do the activity, and then reflect on it, so you're prepared to come back in and do the next one. Yeah.
I mean, within the PBTA, like Sprawl does that as well. Like it's that same cyberpunk heist
Yeah.
model. But yeah, just a thought.
Cool. No, it's super helpful. Thanks. And so this is something I just started doing last year. And to be like totally upfront about this, this is one of those things that I've introduced to the class that I'm not quite sure it does much pedagogically, but it really seems to work to get the students feeling like they are, in fact, like a cohesive village, a cohesive party, a cohesive guild. So it does seem to have a lot of like engagement value, getting them into the game. But in terms of actually learning stuff, there's not a lot here. So the first.
I bet this would be helpful for non-gamers. It's got that sort of Avery Alder kind of vibe about it, right? And I find that if you can just ease people into those games, non-gamers, and they play it just once, they're like, oh, I had no idea that this was even a thing, right? So, I mean, it feels like a good use of 30 minutes to an hour of class time to get people to kind of settle, right? Because they're going to understand their, the sort of the world settings, right? Why do they spend 30 minutes and $100 million on Wonder Woman to introduce you to Themyscira? Because Wonder Woman has a context. And if you don't understand the context, the character's not as rich, right? Why are all these Marvel movies set in New York? Because that's Marvel's jam, right? Right? That kind of thing. So I would encourage you to keep doing it.
That's very helpful. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, that's good. Well, anyway, I'll talk about it. So there's the first tab here is just the village. And the way we've done this in class is to generate the name of our village. What I do is I pass around, it was a sheet of paper that I would pass around. And each adventuring party would cross off 5 of those names, which would leave us with 5 that we could vote on. And so, well, if we have time, we'll just do it today, maybe before we take off. We can see what we want to do. We don't need to do it. What we will do is that if you all will cross off 5, maybe excluding Robbie, that'll leave us 5, and then we can all vote on what we want. For the other tags, so I mean, like as John said, this is basically me taking Dungeon World and trying to give it an Avery Alder spin. So I've kind of like stripped out some of the stuff from Dungeon World, but like, and this stuff comes from Dungeon World, but it is very much a belonging outside of belonging sort of setup in the sense that it's more minimal and it is meant to get non-players into the game. We won't do anything with these tags. It's just to let us know that this is our village, right? Our village is super poor. Nothing's for sale. Nobody has more than they need. And unskilled labor is cheap. And we have no defenses. Like it's just us. It's just our villagers with what they've got, right? In terms of our population, our village will be, and this is a relative term, it's steady, right? It's in line with the size of the village, and there is some growth. I don't have anything that I give the students in terms of like imagining what this world looks like. What I tell them is that it's, in my mind, it's more or less an Adventure Time sort of setting. So if you're familiar with the cartoon Adventure Time, it's a post-apocalyptic fantasy world. And so when they go on the dungeon crawls, they can find things like old busted TVs. And so it's a way to like, again, ease them into this kind of fantasy medieval world if they've never played it before. And it is in terms, I should have said this when we were talking about the safety tools. In terms of like, it is like a PG-13 sort of thing, right? So it's mostly goofy and childlike, but we still bring in those kind of serious moments, especially when we're talking about these ethical issues. But that's the kind of world that we're playing in. It is fantasy medieval, but it is also post-apocalyptic. So there's just people have weird pieced together armor from hubcaps of cars and like, houses. They like the dungeons we're crawling through are old hospitals or they're old airplane hangars or whatever they are. They're like things that are left over from our world that we might be familiar with, even though our characters would view them as these ancient artifacts from a bygone age. One of the things that I want to try this semester, maybe I'll make it homework for you all, is that I really want to get students, like I really want to get students like into their characters. One of the things that hasn't quite happened yet, I've got them into the game, but actually getting them role playing, like the gamers are all about it, but nobody else really does it. So it's not figured out yet, so you might not have to do it, but what I really want to do is get some sort of really quick reflective writing thing just up top to be like, as a person, who are you, where are you from, and why are you at this university? And then use those answers to say something about your character, right? Like, why is your character in this village? Because the idea is that like you've moved from somewhere to this like newly starting village. Like, why are you here? And so I might, if I can figure out a prompt that actually makes sense, I might email that to you all as part of your homework. Just a real quick, like 100-word sort of thing. Like, and so that would be relevant, right? Like if a student's from Florida, like why the hell are they in Snoqualm, right? Like, so like, why is their character who's from some like, I don't know, let's say that they're from like down in the Keys or something, like, right? So like beachy sort of area, like why, if their character's from the beach, why did they move to like this place called Snoqualm? So, all right, so we got our name. It is Snoqualm. We've got our tags here. So somebody's already moved defenses. I'm moving it back. All right, so, and this won't affect us, but mechanically what's going to happen here, you'll notice that like there's 10 advances that could be made here. So prosperity could go up by 4, defenses could go up by 4, and population could go up by 2. One of the things I'm adding this semester is that if an adventuring party, everybody in there gets a satisfactory on every assignment for a unit, they get to move up one of those of their choice of their village, so that by the end they could have maxed out their village. So we'll see if that helps bring an extra level of sort of cohesion to their village, that they're kind of all in this together of improving their village. All right, but for us that probably won't matter.
Yeah.
So basically,
one idea that comes to mind, if you want to go kind of Avery Alder on this a little bit more, would be, as part of the village creation, you could actually, have a map of the village, which could be as a Google drawing or something like that. And then maybe everybody in class gets to either add an NPC who lives in the village, or an establishment in the village, or maybe some geographical feature around the village or something like that. And then you would have, that might kind of both give the students, the players, a greater investment in this place. It might give people more things to kind of, bring into play potentially, but also just kind of flesh out, right? Make the world a little bit more real for them.
John?
Or maybe you put the first thing that guilds have to do is create, like what Robbie was saying, like the Guild of Artificers has to put in a building, and the Guild of Clerics has to put in a geographical feature or something, right? Just to give it a little bit of color, but not maybe too much detail. I mean, because you might have a class that's really big, and then you end up with more stuff maybe than you want, kind of thing. And maybe you want to give the guilds an opportunity to do some guild bonding, right? And to think about what their characters care about, what that type of character cares about, maybe something like that, right?
Yeah.
what I
no,
love about Quiet Year is that you end up with just, oh, look at that.
it looks really familiar. Was that recently kickstarted?
Yeah, this was part of Zine Quest. So you get these maps, and essentially you just highlight things on the map, and then you just start naming them. There's a little structure for it, and there's some characters that you play, but that might be a way to tie together what we're talking about.
Cool. It also reminds me of some of the stuff that Robbie and Aaron and I did with Richard's game, with the
Barrow
putting
Keep.
NPCs and stuff on a map. Although I don't think we had a map, did we?
No, we didn't.
Yeah.
But Beyond the Wall, which is partly what he's drawing from, has a map and kind of populating the village as part of the character creation.
So, yeah, no, I like the idea of having some sort of like a Google Draw to actually create some sort of map artifact. Because this sort of plays into what you all have been talking about. If you go over to the next tab, the basic tags, you'll see that everybody's got something to fill in about the village. And so there's some placeholder text here. Excuse me. I was working on this right up into our session today. I wanted to see like how big a box would need to be to have about 100 words, and that is about the size apparently. And so everybody's got something to kind of fill in about the village. So again, a little bit of homework between now and next time. But so you can see there that the artificer gets to talk about a resource that the village has. The paladin gets to talk about another steading. So it could be a village, could be a town, could be a kingdom, whatever, that we've got some sort of oath that we've pledged to. The merchant gets to talk about another village that we trade with, or then kingdom, any sort of like settlement that we trade with. The cleric gets to talk about the deity or a deity that is revered here, not the deity, but a deity that is revered here. And the wizard gets to talk about something from history that was important that happened here. There's also a box that everybody contributes to. And I'm not quite sure, like I said, this is something I just added, so I'm not quite sure how this is going to work with everyone contributing just 100 words, but typically I would do this myself. Like this, so this is like, so when I first introduced this to my students, we run through it's basically a trolley problem. So someone comes into the village, destroys the village, it gets down to just like the villagers in the classroom. Someone steps forward and says, hey, give us the town leader and we'll leave you all here, or don't give us the town leader and like we die, right? So it is this very much a trolley problem, sort of like, and so I wanted to have this, instead of me coming up with it, I wanted the students to come up with like, who is this, monster outside the village? Typically, I mean, when I do it, what I like about it is I use goblins. And then I introduce to the students, oh yeah, well, there's actually goblins in our village. And then they kind of slowly learn that like this fight between the goblins, like nobody knows why it started. Everybody just keeps perpetuating it because nobody stops to kind of like talk to each other. And by the end, the goblins are no longer the bad guy. So, I mean, it's kind of nice that I get to spin this sort of story when I create it. I assume I'll get to do something similar if they create it anyway. But that's what the Blight's all about. So we'll see. This might be part of kind of what John was talking about with seeing about the kind of riffing that happens in between sessions. I guess we'll see what you all come up with for your Blight that threatens your village. The last tab on here, we won't get to use, but it's the same sort of idea, but they would do this when they become their profession. So you see this advanced tags. There's one where they all get to talk about their guild. The artificer gets to talk about why the village is known for some sort of craft that they're very excellent at creating. The paladin talks about a notable person. And the thought here was that politically, like the paladins would have something to do with this notable person, since they are the legal equivalent. The merchants get to talk about why everyone comes to the market in our village now for trade. The clerics talk about basically their guild, really, right? That there are clerics now in town that can heal people for a price. I really want to see where that goes. It's really funny when students self-select. I've often had people who are very concerned about social justice selecting into the clerics guild. And so I'm imagining like if I give them the option of someone healing for a price, are they going to take it, or are they going to make some sort of like Medicare for all sort of like equivalent of our village? Anyway, and then the wizards get to do the same sort of thing, talking about themselves. But again, it's about education for a price, right? So are they going to make education free, or are they going to have stratified education in their village? So again, we won't get to do those, but that's something I'm going to play with this semester. So I'm going to throw this out there, and see what you all say. And I think since Robbie's our gracious host here, also kind of maybe veto whatever I've got to say here. But since we've only got like about 20 something minutes left, maybe just like I'll shut up. If anybody else has any thoughts or questions, we'll get them on the table. And then if we end up calling it an early day, call it an early day. And so I'll turn it over to Robbie to close it all out here.
Yeah, no, I think we're set. I've really enjoyed it. I mean, it's a very, I think, rich kind of idea that you're working with here, and already I'm kind of like thinking about like, this definitely things that I'm thinking of stealing for for purposes of English classes. And I also find it really fascinating what you've done with taking the paladin and the wizard and then kind of refashioning them into these different kind of professional classes. That's I think a very kind of nice transformation that you've done, really. But yeah, I think we're all kind of enthused and engaged in what you're up to. So and again, I appreciate everybody taking your time out to joining me and Ryan and doing this. So but yeah, I guess we will look forward to the email, and we'll have our homework for us, and then we'll plan on being back next Saturday at the same time.